Hey guys, tonight we're not heading into a castle or a battlefield or a monastery filled with snoring monks. Tonight we're stepping into something a little steamier and probably a lot smellier. You're going to wander barefoot into a medieval bathhouse, a place that promised luxury but usually delivered, well, something much less pleasant. You'll hear the dripping of water, the echo of laughter that might not sound entirely wholesome, and the hiss of steam rising from a cracked copper cauldron. By the time we're done, you'll realize the luxury of the Middle Ages came with more grime, gossip, and body odor than most of us could handle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward through the low wooden door, ducking your head instinctively as the scent of old wood, boiled herbs, and something faintly sour envelops you. The air is thick, humid in a way that sticks to your skin instantly. Inside, the flickering glow of oil lamps glints off water-streaked walls. Everything feels a little too close, a little too alive. You're in a medieval bathhouse, maybe in Paris, or Nuremberg, or London. The year could be anywhere from 1350 to 1450. The atmosphere hasn't changed much in a century. This is not a spa in the modern sense. It's more like a tavern that happens to have hot water. A communal stew of bodies, steam, and noise. A man walks past you carrying a wooden bucket, sloshing half its contents onto the floorboards. Another laughs from inside a steamy alcove, and you catch a glimpse of pale skin, wet linen, and someone holding what looks like a sponge the size of a loaf of bread. Bathhouses were supposed to be luxurious. They were symbols of civilization, proof that even in the muddiest medieval city, people still cared about cleanliness, or at least about pretending to. But luxury was a relative term back then. The walls might be decorated with painted saints or hanging herbs, but look closer, and you'd notice the plaster peeling, mold creeping up the corners, and rats enjoying the warmth behind the ovens. The first thing you'd notice, after the smell, is the sound. Bathhouses were not quiet, contemplative places. They were social arenas, a mix between a bar, a clinic, and a rumor mill. Water dripped, voices echoed, metal clanged, and someone was always coughing. You probably won't survive this place with your 21st century immune system intact. Still, there's something cozy about it. You can almost imagine the relief of shedding layers of rough wool clothing, dipping into a hot tub of water, and feeling the week's grime loosen from your skin. For many medieval people, that sensation was the closest they'd ever get to true comfort. Historians still argue whether most townsfolk bathed regularly or rarely at all. Some evidence suggests that in places like southern France or the Holy Roman Empire, bathing was part of everyday life. In others, particularly England, it was more of a special occasion, something you'd save for feast days or major holidays. What's clear, though, is that bathhouses were everywhere by the 14th century. Some cities had dozens competing for customers with names like the Angel, the Crown, or the Dragon's Tub. You stand there, still dripping slightly from the humidity, as a bathhouse attendant eyes you. He's wearing a tunic that's seen better days, its sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms slick with steam and sweat. He gestures for you to follow him. Perhaps you've paid your entry fee, a few copper coins at the door. As you walk deeper inside, the floorboards grow slicker. The light grows dimmer. On your left, two women laugh softly in a corner, their hair pinned up with bronze combs. On your right, An older man snores in a shallow pool, his beard floating like seaweed. There's nothing particularly scandalous about this scene, not yet anyway, but the atmosphere hovers somewhere between comfort and chaos. The water itself is far from clean. It's drawn from the nearest well or river, hauled in buckets, and heated in large cauldrons over smoky fires. There's no plumbing system in the modern sense. Once the bath is filled, it might serve a dozen or more people before being emptied, refilled, and reused. If you're unlucky enough to arrive late in the day, the luxury of your soak includes the sweat, oil, and occasional skin flakes of everyone before you. Yet, for medieval standards, this was heavenly. You can smell rosemary and lavender, herbs tossed into the water to give a sense of freshness and, conveniently, to mask the natural scent of the clientele. Some bathhouses used mint or thyme, not for fragrance alone, but for supposed medicinal benefits. People believed these plants purified the body and soul, drawing out bad humors. Of course, they also conveniently disguised the faint whiff of mildew and smoke. You notice the heat source, a great brick furnace in the corner, where an apprentice stirs the fire with a poker longer than your arm. The air wavers around it, thick and golden like the inside of a bread oven. Heating the bathwater took an enormous amount of wood, one reason only the prosperous could afford to do it often. Here's a mainstream fact. In many medieval cities, bathhouses were so popular that local authorities had to regulate wood prices, fearing the bath trade would burn through the town's entire supply. It wasn't just a luxury issue, it was an environmental one.
And then there's the fringe tidbit, one of those weird historical corners that makes you tilt your head. In some places, notably 15th century Bohemia, bathers were advised to rub goose fat on their skin before entering the water. Supposedly, it sealed the pores and protected against fever. Realistically, it just turned people into slippery, roast-in-progress versions of themselves. As you watch, a man dips a cup into the steaming pool and pours it over his shoulders with a sigh. There's no concept yet of germs or bacteria, no suspicion that warm, shared water could spread disease. To most medieval minds, the bath purified you. It cleansed not just the body, but the soul, sweeping away sin and melancholy along with grime. Historians still argue whether the decline of bathing after the Black Death came from fear of infection or moral panic. The narrator murmurs, voice drifting like steam. Some thought open pores let in the plague itself. Others thought bathhouses let in the devil. For now, though, in your 14th century night, none of that matters. You sit on the edge of the tub, feet dangling in the water. The warmth climbs your legs like a living thing. Somewhere behind you, a woman hums a tune that's part lullaby, part prayer. The stones underfoot are slick, the water cloudy, but it's easy to see why people came here to escape the cold and noise of the world outside. In winter, these bathhouses were some of the few heated spaces in the city. They became meeting places, gossip circles, even business offices. A deal struck in a bathhouse, after all, was one sealed with steam, and therefore, supposedly, honesty. You glance up. Condensation drips from the ceiling, forming slow, fat drops that plop into the water. The smell of wood smoke mixes with sweat and soapwort, a plant that produces the sudsy bubbles you see floating lazily across the surface. Someone offers you a towel, rough linen, not fluffy cotton, and gestures to a wooden bench. It's time for the scrubbing, a medieval exfoliation ritual involving coarse cloths and vigorous effort. You comply, wincing slightly as the fabric scrapes against your arm. But afterward, Your skin tingles, almost glowing. There's a small moment of peace then. The chatter dies down. The fire pops softly in the corner. The air grows thick, but pleasantly so, as though you're wrapped in a damp blanket of warmth and earth. And just as your eyelids begin to droop, a cat darts across the floorboards, chasing something invisible. You smile. Apparently, even the bathhouse has residents who never pay. This world you're drifting through isn't glamorous. It's messy, noisy, and full of contradictions. But it's also deeply human. Here, people come to forget hunger, loneliness, and the cold, even if only for an hour. They trade stories, songs, and skin oil in equal measure. And as you rest there, surrounded by flickering lamplight and the faint hum of voices, you start to feel it, that strange medieval blend of comfort and discomfort, of filth disguised as splendor, the kind of luxury that only exists when you have nothing better to compare it to. Somewhere in the haze, someone whispers a prayer before stepping into the water. Another jokes that they'll come out as clean as a saint, or at least as clean as a sinner can afford. And you, dear listener, just lean back, close your eyes, and let the steam blur the edges of time.
You're still sitting in the haze, but now your eyes begin to adjust. The silhouettes around you sharpen, faces emerge from the fog, and you start to notice the unspoken rules that govern this damp little world. The bathhouse, as chaotic as it looks, has a rhythm, a social order as carefully balanced as any royal court. Not everyone here comes for the same reason, and not everyone is welcome in the same way. Who goes in? That's the question. Because bathing in the Middle Ages wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about status, gender, and reputation. You might imagine peasants and nobles sharing the same tub, clinking cups of ale like old friends. That's mostly a romantic fantasy. In reality, class determined nearly everything about your bathing experience, from the size of the tub to the scent of the water, even the company you were allowed to keep. At the highest end of the social ladder, nobles often had private bath chambers, small rooms within their manors or castles, where water was heated and poured into wooden tubs lined with linen. A servant might test the temperature with their elbow before inviting the lord or lady to step in. The bath water would be perfumed with rose petals, lavender, or crushed bay leaves. Music might drift in from an adjoining chamber. Meanwhile, in town, the middle and lower classes made do with public baths, like the one you're standing in now, a place that mixed tradesmen, travelers, students, and the occasional daring noble who wanted to see how the other half bathed. You notice the subtle divisions even here. The better-off townsfolk cluster near the cleaner end of the pool, where the water's just been refilled. The poorer patrons linger at the far end, where the steam is heavier, the water more opaque. Nobody says anything, but everyone knows. A young couple enters, laughing softly, and you see the attendant usher them toward a curtained alcove. Privacy costs extra. Behind those curtains, they might share a romantic soak, or perhaps just escape the crowd. Medieval society officially frowned on mixed bathing, but it was common enough that even city ordinances admitted defeat. In some places, like Paris or Bath in England, separate hours were introduced, mornings for women, afternoons for men. But it wasn't strictly enforced. After all, the allure of a co-ed bath was part of the draw. Bathhouses were where gossip flowed as freely as the water, and scandal wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. You watch as an older woman, perhaps a midwife, rinses her hands methodically in a small wooden basin. She chats with a younger girl beside her, maybe an apprentice, maybe her daughter. They laugh about something you can't quite catch, the sound warm and human amid the splashes. These women, the everyday bathers, came not only to wash, but to connect. A mainstream historical fact, in medieval Europe, public baths were among the few places where women could gather socially outside the home without immediate suspicion. They discussed childbirth, medicine, and matchmaking, the quiet commerce of domestic wisdom that rarely made it into written history. Then, just as your thoughts settle, a stern-looking man in a heavy wool cloak steps through the doorway. His presence seems to lower the room's temperature. He's not here to bathe. He's here to judge. Maybe a city official is inspecting for improper behavior. Maybe a priest, convinced that the bathhouse is a gateway to sin. You can almost hear the shift in the crowd's mood. Conversations dim. Laughter grows cautious. Even the steam feels thicker, more secretive. The man's gaze lingers a little too long on the curtained alcove before he mutters something about moral decay and leaves. The bathers exhale collectively, the tension dissolving back into steam. Someone makes a quiet joke, something about how sin seems to bathe more often than saints, and the room laughs again. Historians still argue whether mixed bathing reflected decadence or simple practicality, the narrator hums softly. Maybe both. After all, comfort has always flirted with temptation. You start noticing patterns. The young men who show off their shoulders, pretending not to care who's watching. The older merchants who come just to sit and talk business in a warm room. The women who sneak glances at each other's jewelry, comparing silent markers of wealth and taste. Bathhouses, in a way, were mirrors of society, every splash reflecting hierarchy and desire. Even the towels told stories. Rough flax for the poor, fine linen for those who could afford it. The soap, too, varied, from simple lye blocks that stripped the skin raw to imported Castilian bars scented with olive oil and lemon. You turn your gaze to a side chamber where servants move briskly between tubs, carrying buckets and brushes. These attendants see everything, but say nothing. They are invisible and indispensable. For them, the bathhouse isn't leisure, it's labor. A young boy approaches with a jug of wine, offering a refill to a customer. Alcohol was common here, sometimes included in the price of admission. People drank while bathing, to relax, to gossip, to forget, and perhaps to disinfect their insides from whatever might be lurking in that murky water. Then there are the rules, unwritten but universally understood. Don't stare too long, don't splash too much. Don't make trouble for the attendants, and never, under any circumstances, mention the fact that the person next to you hasn't paid in full, because someone always hasn't. You might think this is all harmless fun, but reputation mattered deeply. A woman who visited the bathhouse too often could easily be whispered about. A man seen leaving after dark might have to explain himself to his wife or his priest. The line between respectable relaxation and suspect indulgence was a razor thin.
And yet, they kept coming, because beneath all the moral noise, the bathhouse offered something rare. Freedom. For a few coins, anyone could escape the cold, sit in warmth, and feel like royalty, even if just for an hour. It was a place where barriers softened, much like the skin in hot water, where merchants spoke to masons, and nuns, sometimes incognito, shared space with courtesans. Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. In some German towns, couples actually held wedding feasts in bathhouses. They'd eat roasted meats and pastries beside steaming pools, musicians perched on benches, steam mingling with laughter. Afterward, the newlyweds might take a symbolic cleansing bath together, an act of both purity and, let's be honest, practicality. Of course, not everyone found that charming. Moralists called these ceremonies disgraceful. Chroniclers hinted that too much wine led to unseemly behavior. But for ordinary people, it was simply joyful, a celebration of life and warmth in a cold, hard world. The bathhouse, in that sense, was an equalizer. The water didn't care about titles or bloodlines. Once submerged, even the proudest noble looked like everyone else, pink, pruned, and human. You shift slightly in your seat, listening to the hum of conversation rise again. A man boasts about a trade deal. A woman complains that the water's cooling too quickly. Someone asks for more sage leaves to scent the tub. It's all wonderfully mundane, yet strangely intimate. There's a kind of democracy in shared discomfort. Everyone, regardless of status, leaves a little red and wrinkled. A scholar might tell you that public baths helped reinforce civic identity. They were communal spaces that made a city feel alive. Others argue they were moral hazards, breeding grounds for vice and disease. The truth, as usual, floats somewhere in between. Because if you look closely, beneath the laughter and the steam, you'll see what's really going on. The fragile dance of medieval social life. Everyone pretending to follow the rules, everyone quietly bending them. Someone nearby sneezes, splashing water across your arm. You glance over and catch their apologetic smile. No harm done. In a world where life expectancy hovers around 40, a sneeze is the least of your worries. You sit back again, let the steam close in, and imagine the lives that passed through here. The merchant who dreamed of wealth, the widow who came to feel warmth on her skin again, the apprentice who scrubbed floors for pennies. Each of them came chasing the same thing, the illusion of luxury, of renewal, of brief escape. And as the night deepens and the last rays of daylight vanish from the high fogged window, you realize something quietly profound. The bathhouse isn't just about who goes in, it's about what they leave behind. The dirt, yes, but also the weight of the outside world, the shame, the status, the stress. For a few fleeting moments, they all vanish into the steam. You take a slow breath, feel the air thicken again, and drift a little deeper into the warmth until even the idea of class starts to dissolve like soap.
You've settled deeper into the bathhouse now, letting the heat curl around your limbs like a second skin. The rhythm of dripping water, murmured conversations, and the occasional clatter of a wooden bucket against stone is almost hypnotic. But it's time to notice something else, the water itself, its source, its journey, and the very messiness that makes this entire world tick. You're about to confront the gritty reality of water and waste in a medieval bathhouse, and it's not for the faint of heart. The first thing you notice is that the water isn't sparkling. It's murky in a way that suggests not only dirt, but also human presence. Today, it's your turn to bathe, but yesterday, 10 other people, maybe more, soaked in this same tub. You catch traces of soapwort floating like little clouds on the surface, mingling with oils, sweat, and whatever else people have brought with them. In larger cities, bathhouses often drew water from nearby rivers, streams, or wells. Sometimes cisterns collected rainwater stored in large barrels or tanks. Heating it was another ordeal. Massive copper or iron cauldrons had to be stoked with firewood for hours. Apprentices shoveled logs in tirelessly, while attendants tested the temperature with sticks, elbows, or bare feet. Not that they were always successful. You can imagine stepping in only to find the water scalding at one end and ice cold at the other. Here's a mainstream historical fact for context. Urban bathhouses often recycled water multiple times, especially in poorer districts. The first bath of the day might have been relatively clean, But by afternoon, the water could be a thick soup of skin flakes, grime, and yes, fecal particles. Because let's face it, accidents happened. The human body is unpredictable, and medieval plumbing was non-existent. You probably won't survive this with modern sensibilities intact, but that's okay. You're here to experience it, not to judge it. And yet, it's not all just filth. There's a strategy behind the chaos. Attendants would occasionally pour fresh hot water into pools to dilute the previous user's contribution. Herbs were added not only for scent, but also for antiseptic properties, at least as far as people understood them. Sage, rosemary, thyme, even crushed mint leaves floated lazily, meant to ward off disease or purify the air. Medieval medicine had a strong faith in humors, and water was thought to wash out imbalance. Historians still argue whether bathhouses genuinely improved public health or simply offered psychological comfort, though modern scientists might suggest the answer is somewhere in between. But let's take a moment to consider the logistics. Imagine hauling water by the bucket from a well or river. One attendant might carry dozens of these per day. Each bucket was a laborious journey, upstairs, through corridors, past patrons waiting impatiently. Spilled water was inevitable, which meant slick floors. Every drop that didn't reach the tub might splash across feet, legs, and even the small wooden benches where bathers waited. And then there was waste management. The effluent from a bathhouse, water, sweat, and other bodily excretions had to go somewhere. In some cities, it was dumped directly into streets or rivers. In others, drains were carved beneath the floorboards, channeling water into open sewers. The result? Streets that smelled foul, especially in summer, and rivers thick with debris. Modern urban planners would faint, but medieval citizens had grown accustomed to it. For them, the bathhouse was a controlled environment of filth, and that was enough. You watch a man carefully lift a small bucket, pour its contents into the tub, and nod approvingly. Perhaps he's an artisan, judging the temperature. Perhaps he's a scholar, noting the consistency. Or perhaps he's just a regular patron who enjoys tinkering with the water. In medieval times, bathers often played a part in maintaining their own hygiene environment. Everyone had to cooperate. The fringe detail here is the occasional recommendation of animal additives. Yes, you heard that right. In certain places, medieval guides suggested adding a bit of cow's milk, goat's whey, or even horse urine to the bath for medicinal purposes. Supposedly, it softened skin, cured rashes, or prevented plague. You might cringe, but remember, this was a period when understanding of disease was limited and trial, error, and folklore ruled the day. You dip a hand into the water, noticing the temperature gradient from one end of the tub to the other. Steam curls off the surface, wrapping you in a soft, almost tangible blanket. You realize the water is doing more than cleaning. It's performing a social and psychological function. Patrons feel refreshed, relaxed, and temporarily equalized. There's warmth, there's community, and there's a sense of shared humanity. And yet, there's danger. Not the kind we're used to, no electric shocks or chemical contaminants, but the kind that medieval minds feared most. Diseases, miasmas, and moral corruption were all believed to lurk in this same water. The bubonic plague, for instance, instilled paranoia in city dwellers. Some chroniclers suggested that public baths were breeding grounds for infection, while others argued the opposite, that bathing actually reduced sickness by cleansing the body. Historians still argue whether fear or superstition led to the eventual decline of communal bathing in some regions. You notice a curious ritual taking place. A small boy pours water over his head using a carved wooden ladle, chanting a rhyme that seems more like superstition than play. Nearby, an old man rubs the grime from the skin with a stiff brush made from animal hair. Each action seems deliberate, part of a routine passed down through families or learned from neighbors. Bathing wasn't just hygiene, it was a ceremony.
And then there's the interplay of smells.
a constant negotiation between what's pleasant and what's unavoidable. Herbs provide fleeting sweetness, but they mingle with human sweat, smoke from the furnace, and damp stone. Every inhale reminds you that cleanliness is relative. The medieval mind treated these odors as part of life's texture. Today, we'd reach for hand sanitizer. Back then, you breathed, you endured, and you learned to ignore. Even with all this filth, there was hierarchy within the pools. The water closer to the heat source tended to be hotter and therefore more desirable. Patrons jockeyed for position like sunbathers on a crowded beach. Nobody said it outright, but everyone understood the right spot could make the difference between a luxurious soak and a lukewarm disappointment. You notice the attendants again, moving silently but efficiently. They lift, pour, scrub, and monitor with a subtle authority. Their presence underscores the structured chaos. Without them, the bathhouse would descend into anarchy, and you'd be floating in a soup of humanity that no one would dare enter. Quirky tidbit. In some Italian bathhouses, patrons were advised to bring their own small fish to nibble at dead skin while soaking. Supposedly, this was therapeutic, a medieval version of the modern fish pedicure. You shiver at the thought, but also marvel at the ingenuity. Desperation and curiosity often make for the strangest remedies. The main lesson here is that water and waste defined the medieval bathhouse. Every element, heat, circulation, herb infusion, and disposal, was a dance between necessity, comfort, and perception. Patrons came not only to wash, but to participate in a ritual of communal management. They tolerated discomfort, embraced ritual, and accepted the unknown because the reward, warmth, renewal, and fleeting luxury was worth it. You lean back, letting the water lap against your arms and legs, noticing how every droplet seems to carry both history and humanity. Each splash is a story. The apprentice who hauled it, the merchant who paid for it, the child who played beside it. You realize the bathhouse is more than a place, it's a microcosm of medieval life, messy, fragrant, social, and endlessly human. And as the steam curls around your face, you breathe in the contradictions, filth and comfort, danger and delight, necessity and indulgence. Here in this tub, it's all happening at once. And somehow, that makes the murky water feel almost sacred.
The water has settled around you like a warm, embracing fog. But now your eyes drift upward, taking in the details meant to distract, impress, and delight. You begin to notice the elements of luxury, the gilded edges of a wooden tub, the faded frescoes on the walls, the occasional silver basin gleaming on a shelf. But the closer you look, the more you realize that all of this is a careful illusion. Medieval baths were masters of appearances, a theater of comfort that masked some rather unglamorous truths. You trudge over to a corner where the walls are painted with scenes of saints and river gods. The pigments, vibrant at first glance, are fading unevenly. Water stains run down like tears, blending sacred imagery with mold. You can see why visitors might leave feeling impressed. The artistry suggests wealth and civility, but you also know the reality beneath the paint: stone walls that leak, dampness seeping from cracks, and a smell that no decoration can fully disguise. That's the paradox of medieval luxury. It existed in presentation more than substance. Perfumes and herbs, rosewater and lavender were sprinkled liberally not only on bathers but on the environment itself. Fragrant oils coated benches, while small bundles of thyme or rosemary dangled from beams. The scents promised cleanliness, even as the water below betrayed the body oils, sweat, and dirt accumulated over multiple users. A mainstream historical fact: many prominent bathhouses were designed with intricate woodwork and carved stone, sometimes imported from distant regions. Marble and tiled surfaces were rare, expensive, and considered the height of sophistication. People willingly paid premium prices to immerse themselves in this constructed comfort. And it worked. Your senses are tricked. Your brain associates ornate surroundings with sanitation, even when the reality is far less elegant. You notice the attendants moving with deliberate care, wiping surfaces, brushing down wooden benches, adjusting lamps. Their labor is invisible yet essential, maintaining the illusion of hygiene. The skill of these attendants lay not just in physical work, but in performing cleanliness, a delicate choreography of gestures, movements, and timing. Patrons believed they were enjoying luxury, when really they were participating in a careful deception. Quirky historical tidbit: some bathhouses employed scent merchants, specialists who concocted perfumed powders and powders infused with herbs, flowers, or even powdered pearls to sprinkle over the bathwater. Patrons were often encouraged to use these, believing the scent itself was purifying. Of course, some powders were more cosmetic than medicinal, adding a superficial glow that made the bath appear cleaner than it was. You notice how the architecture itself reinforces this illusion. Vaulted ceilings create echoes that amplify laughter and conversation, masking the sound of dripping water or the occasional squawk from a resident bird or rat. Lamps hang from chains to cast soft light across the wet surfaces, hiding imperfections and shadow. Every visual cue is a reminder: luxury is what the eye believes it is. And yet, the luxury of the bathhouse extends beyond visuals. Some patrons had access to towels, sheets, and linens that were exceptionally soft, or at least softer than the average household could provide. The wealthy brought their own imported linens, sometimes embroidered with family crests, while others relied on house supplies, rough flax cloth that scraped at the skin. Here, as elsewhere, appearances mattered more than comfort. You observe a couple of men lounging near a tub, dipping fingers into the water, testing its temperature. They engage in quiet conversation, discussing trade deals, politics, or the latest gossip. The luxury of the bathhouse was social as much as it was physical. It was a place to be seen and to see others in a controlled setting, where appearances mattered as much as hygiene. There's also the role of perceived cleanliness in health. Medieval patrons believed that well-scented rooms and perfumed water could prevent disease, ward off miasmas, and maintain humors in balance. A bathhouse with ornate tiles and herbal fragrances felt safer than a simple tub in a back alley, even if the water was essentially the same. Historians still argue whether the perception of hygiene actually impacted mortality rates. But what's clear is that the illusion of luxury was a powerful psychological tool. You glance over to a small niche where bath oils and soaps are arranged like treasures. The scents are intoxicating: sandalwood, rosemary, rose, lavender. Patrons dab at their skin, pouring tiny amounts of liquid over their arms and shoulders. For a moment, you can almost forget that the water beneath you has been used by dozens of people already. The mind is easily fooled, especially when it craves comfort. And yet, no amount of gilding or fragrance could completely disguise the reality of dampness, mold, and shared water. You notice the tiles cracking along the edges, small splashes of brown at the corners, and the faint smell of mildew that no herb can fully cover. Luxury in the Middle Ages was aspirational, an exercise in crafting an experience rather than achieving perfection. You lean back against the side of the tub and take it all in: the heat, the scent, the visual cues, the gentle social murmur. It's an environment designed to make you feel wealthy and cared for, even if the underlying reality is far more modest. The contrast between appearances and reality is part of the magic and part of the humanity of medieval baths.
Quirky aside, In some Italian cities, bathhouse owners would hire musicians or poets to enhance the atmosphere. You might soak in a pool while a lute plays in the corner, the sound mingling with steam and the smell of herbs. The performance of luxury was literal and sometimes absurd, but effective. Patrons left feeling pampered, even when their feet were wet with yesterday's dirt. And let's not forget the symbolic power of water itself. Bathing was a metaphor for purity, renewal, and social elevation. The sight of a well-dressed merchant or a noble lady entering a bathhouse carried meaning. It suggested refinement, wealth, and civility. Even the act of stepping into a shared pool was a small performance, an enactment of grace in a world that rarely offered leisure. You notice how the illusions extend to sound and movement as well? Fountains trickle in small alcoves, creating a gentle patter that masks any unpleasant splashes. Lamps flicker in patterns that distract the eye from peeling paint or water-stained walls. The attendants move with measured grace, maintaining an aesthetic of calm, control, and care. All of this ensures that patrons leave feeling pampered, even though the reality is that they have sat in water shared by dozens of other people, some of whom may have been sick, sweaty, or otherwise unclean. And yet, the experience works. You feel lighter, cleaner, and somehow elevated. The combination of heat, scent, visual richness, and social interaction convinces you that luxury exists, even if you know better. That's the brilliance of the medieval bath. It's a stage set for comfort, a theater of cleanliness, and a sensory escape from the harshness of daily life. As you close your eyes, imagining yourself walking back through the crowded streets, the memory of warmth and aroma lingers. The illusion of luxury has done its job. You feel rejuvenated, if only partially, and you recognize the deep human need for experiences that elevate, distract, and soothe. Here in this steamy, fragrant room, you understand the essence of medieval baths. They were less about actual hygiene and more about the illusion of refinement, community, and escape. And in that fleeting, mist-filled moment, you are part of that long human tradition of seeking comfort wherever it can be found.
The warmth has seeped into your muscles, the water lapping gently around your arms, and now you start to notice the faintly smoky tang in the air. It isn't incense or herbs this time. It's the furnace, the heart of the bathhouse, quietly reminding you that every ounce of comfort requires effort. This is where you confront the heat, hypocausts, and hearths that kept the water warm, the air soft, and the illusion of luxury alive. You shuffle closer to the corner where a massive brick furnace hums with life. Flames flicker through the small iron grate, casting long shadows across the wet stone walls. The air near it is dense, almost heavy, carrying the mixed aromas of smoke, herbs, and heated stone. This is where medieval ingenuity meets necessity. Bathhouses required constant heating, and achieving it was a delicate balance of fuel, design, and human labor. You notice the attendants, young and old, moving with deliberate precision. Some stoke the fire, shoveling logs and fanning embers. Others test water temperatures in adjacent pools, pouring hot water where it's needed and adjusting flow to maintain equilibrium. The work is grueling. They move quickly, but even their speed cannot completely smooth over the inconsistencies inherent in medieval engineering. A mainstream historical fact: many bathhouses relied on hypocaust systems, underfloor heating that sent hot air through channels beneath the stone floors. Originating from Roman architecture, these systems were expensive and difficult to maintain, but they allowed rooms to stay warm for hours. Wealthier urban baths could afford these installations,
giving patrons a slightly more luxurious experience than simpler hearth-heated alternatives. You dip your hand into the water and notice the subtle gradient, hotter near one end, cooler at the other. That's not accidental. The hypocust's effectiveness varied across the floor, and bathers learned quickly which spots offered the optimal warmth. Sometimes, a tip from an attendant or a local regular could save you from spending an entire soak in tepid misery. And then there's the fringe detail, one that makes you raise your eyebrow and wonder about medieval engineering creativity. In some northern European towns, bathhouses used heated stones placed directly in tubs. These stones were preheated in the furnace and dropped into the water to raise its temperature. The method was effective, if slightly alarming. A poorly placed stone could scald skin or crack a wooden tub. You can imagine the occasional yelp followed by embarrassed laughter. The logistics of keeping a bathhouse warm were staggering. Every liter of water had to be heated manually. Fires needed constant feeding. Ashes had to be cleared, soot monitored, and chimneys cleaned. A single failure, a cold room, a blocked vent, or a mismanaged hearth could ruin the experience for dozens of patrons. In some cities, bathhouse owners employed apprentices who specialized solely in managing the furnace. Their pay was meager, their work exhausting, but without them, the bathhouse simply would not function. You lean back against the warm stone edge, letting the heat from the hypocust seep upward through the floor. The sensation is almost meditative, a low hum of warmth that seems to vibrate through your bones. It's easy to see why people returned day after day, or at least season after season, despite the mess, the murkiness, and the occasional stench. A scholarly debate lingers here as well. Historians still argue whether hypocust systems were primarily adopted for hygiene, luxury, or status signaling. Some believe they were a practical way to keep patrons comfortable, reducing the risk of chills or disease. Others suggest they were more of a display, a subtle but potent demonstration of a city or owner's wealth and engineering sophistication. Either way, the result is clear. Medieval bathhouses were technologically impressive, even by modern standards. As you breathe in the warm, smoky air, you begin to notice the rhythms of the attendant's labor. One stirs the fire, sending sparks into the chimney. Another lifts a bucket of boiling water and tips it into a pool, creating gentle waves. A young apprentice sweeps ash into a small pile, careful not to let it drift onto wet floorboards. Everything is choreographed, a quiet ballet that ensures comfort despite the constant threat of chaos. The fringe practices extend beyond heating alone. Some bathhouses experimented with double-heated pools, a smaller tub within the main pool, insulated and filled with hotter water. Patrons could move between the inner and outer pools, adjusting temperature according to preference. These arrangements were rare and expensive, but they demonstrate the lengths to which medieval bathkeepers went to cultivate luxury, even in the face of overwhelming physical labor and logistical hurdles. Meanwhile, you notice the smoke curling through small vents in the ceiling, dispersing slowly. It carries the scent of firewood, resin, and occasionally soot, mingling with herbs and human warmth. You inhale deeply, recognizing that this too was part of the experience. Heat in medieval baths was more than a utility. It was atmosphere, mood, and a tactile reminder that someone was laboring on your comfort. Even the architecture contributes to the illusion of luxury. Vaulted ceilings help circulate air, preventing stifling heat. Stone walls retain warmth long after fires burn down. Windows, when present, are small and frosted, letting in light without chilling the room. Every element, from hypocust to hearth, is a combination of practicality and performance.
You glance at a fellow bather, feet dangling in a shallow pool. He shifts slightly to a hotter spot near a hypocaust vent, nodding in quiet satisfaction. You realize that heat in a medieval bathhouse was negotiated constantly, between water and stone, furnace and floor, patrons and attendants. Mastery of this invisible dance defined comfort. Quirky tidbit: in some German bathhouses, attendants would use heated bricks wrapped in cloth to warm benches before patrons sat down. Imagine sliding onto a bench that radiates gentle heat, the surface prepped like a medieval heated seat. It's luxurious, a little ridiculous, and undeniably effective. The bathhouse in this sense is more than a place to clean your body. It's a mechanical marvel, a performance of warmth, a social hub, and a carefully curated sensory environment. Without the hypocaust, the hearth, and the constant labor of attendants, all the herbs, perfumes, and visual flourishes would be meaningless. Luxury, medieval style, requires infrastructure as much as intention. You feel a kind of awe as you settle back, allowing the warmth to creep into every joint. The heat is intimate, tactile, and comforting, a human-engineered embrace. Here, in this steamy, smoky sanctuary, you understand the lengths people went to for comfort, the ingenuity they displayed, and the small absurdities that made medieval bathing both challenging and unforgettable. The water laps gently around your arms, the stone beneath you radiates heat, and the hum of the furnace blends with the chatter and splashes around the room. You realize, softly, that this is what disgusting luxury truly means. Effort, ingenuity, and ingenuity applied to a human need so basic, yet so profound. And as the steam curls lazily above the pools, you close your eyes for a moment, letting the heat, labor, and ingenuity wash over you. You are warmed, soothed, and slightly scandalized, a perfect medieval experience.
You linger a little longer in the warmth, but your curiosity eventually pushes you to wander. The bathhouse isn't just a place for soaking, it's a world within a world, with its own rhythms, characters, and quiet chaos. You step out of the steamy room and into a dimly lit corridor, following the murmur of voices and the creak of floorboards. What awaits beyond the steam is something far more human. The people behind the luxury, the ones who keep this entire illusion alive, and the odd social web that binds them together. You can smell soap and ash on your skin as you move. Around you, attendants rush about with towels, trays, and pitchers of scented water. Their faces glisten with sweat, but they never break composure. The medieval bathhouse is a strange mix of hierarchy and intimacy. Nobles soaking beside merchants, servants brushing elbows with their masters, and attendants navigating every class with practiced politeness. A mainstream historical fact: in many European cities, bathhouses were social equalizers, rare public spaces where status blurred, if only temporarily. Wealthy nobles might have private rooms, but the general pools often hosted townsfolk from all walks of life. It wasn't unusual to find a scholar chatting with a craftsman, or a wealthy widow gossiping with a washerwoman. The steam softened distinctions, at least until everyone put their clothes back on. You walk through the corridor and notice a small group gathered around a table. They're not bathing at all. Instead, they're eating. Small loaves of bread, smoked fish, and bowls of warm wine. Yes, people ate in bathhouses. The image of dining amid steam might sound absurd, but it was common enough that medieval laws occasionally had to remind patrons not to bring full feasts into public baths. You imagine the smell of garlic and broth blending with lavender and sweat, romantic in its own unsettling way. You catch the eye of an attendant, a wiry young man with rolled sleeves and a towel slung over his shoulder. He gives you a nod that seems to say, "Don't worry, I've seen worse." You follow his movements as he refills a basin, wipes down a bench, and discreetly picks up a forgotten stocking from the floor. These attendants were part janitor, part therapist, part diplomat. They heard confessions, mediated disputes, and occasionally helped patrons out of tubs when the heat became too much. Quirky tidbit. Attendants often doubled as gossip collectors. Patrons would chat freely while soaking, and sharp-eared workers could gather valuable information, news of trade deals, scandals, or political tensions. Some even made a small living selling rumors to interested buyers. You imagine one now, leaning close to a merchant's ear, murmuring about a rival's bad shipment or a noble's hidden affair. As you move deeper into the bathhouse, you find another group, women this time, laughing softly in a curtained alcove. Their tubs are smaller, the lighting dimmer, the space filled with the scent of rose water and chamomile. Female bathhouses, or women's hours, were common in many cities, offering a degree of privacy that male patrons often lacked. Here, too, attendants worked tirelessly, maintaining temperature, refilling oils, and ensuring decorum, though decorum was a flexible word in these places. Historians still argue whether mixed bathing was the norm or the exception. Some records describe men and women sharing baths without much fuss, while others condemn the practice as scandalous. It likely varied from place to place, from century to century. What's certain is that bathhouses were complex social ecosystems, part hygiene, part recreation, part performance. You hear laughter echoing from a distant chamber, mingling with the rhythmic splash of water. The sound has a hypnotic quality, like waves lapping against stone. You pass a doorway where a small ensemble of musicians plays softly, their lute and flute providing a soundtrack to the steam. Bathhouses often employed entertainers, not just for ambiance, but to drown out the less pleasant noises. Coughing, arguing, splashing, or worse. You paused by a table stacked with towels, noticing how coarse they feel. Towels were a luxury in themselves, often made from linen or rough wool. Patrons dried themselves quickly, then draped cloths around their shoulders or waist before lounging in heated rooms. You picture the moment when someone steps from the water, steam rising from their skin, wrapped in cloth that's still slightly damp from previous use. The illusion of cleanliness, once again, rests on borrowed fabric. The attendants move seamlessly through this microcosm, blending practicality with charm. They know who prefers hotter water, who tips generously, who complains. A well-run bathhouse was a finely tuned social machine. One wrong gesture, one forgotten courtesy, and the illusion of luxury could crumble. You watch one attendant skillfully navigate between patrons, offering a ladle of perfumed water here, a towel there, always smiling, always composed. Some bathhouses, particularly in cities like Paris and Nuremberg, employed female attendants known as bathing maidens. Their roles ranged from purely professional to deeply controversial, blurring the line between service and companionship. You can sense the tension in these stories, the way medieval morality struggled to contain human behavior inside walls filled with heat, sweat, and bare skin. It's another layer of the filthy luxury theme. What was meant to be civilizing often revealed the opposite. You imagine sitting at the edge of a pool, listening to the hum of voices around you. A merchant brags about his latest shipment. A scholar complains about taxes. Two women discuss the quality of the water today. Not as clean as last week, but warmer. You realize that this chatter, this social soup, is what made bathhouses thrive. It wasn't just about washing. It was about belonging.
The social rules here are unspoken but strict. You don't splash too much. You don't monopolize the hot spot. You don't eavesdrop too obviously, though everyone does. You greet acquaintances, make small talk, and pretend not to notice when the water grows a little cloudy near your knees. You are, in every sense, performing civility while floating in communal warmth. A fringe detail emerges from the haze of history. In some regions, bathhouse workers were taxed separately, classified as part of the pleasure industry. It wasn't just about bathing, it was about atmosphere, relaxation, and at times, indulgence. Church officials often railed against bathhouses, accusing them of moral decay, only to be found soaking in them the following week. The hypocrisy is almost enduring. As you walk past another chamber, you notice a pair of attendants refilling a wooden trough. They move silently, efficiently, almost invisible. One hums a song under his breath, a folk tune, familiar and soothing. You wonder how many stories these walls have heard. Laughter, whispers, confessions, arguments, maybe even tears. The bathhouse absorbs it all, just like the water it holds, filtering, blending, disguising. You find yourself smiling at the absurd humanity of it all. People from every walk of life coming together wrapped in steam, pretending that luxury is simple and purity achievable. The attendants maintain the performance, the patrons play their roles, and together they create something surprisingly beautiful, a ritual of imperfection. You return to your seat by the pool, the air heavier now with heat and scent. Around you the chatter is softened into a low hum. Someone laughs softly, someone sighs in contentment. The attendants still move quietly in the background, orchestrating comfort with invisible skill. You feel a strange kinship with them. Their labor, unseen but essential, mirrors the unseen effort behind every moment of comfort you've ever known. Here, in the flickering glow of lamps and steam, the bathhouse feels almost alive, a breathing, sweating, whispering organism fueled by fire, gossip, and human longing. You close your eyes and listen to the rhythm of it all. Heat, water, laughter, work. The medieval bathhouse may be filthy beneath its perfume, but it is undeniably human, and in that you find its truest luxury.
You shift slightly, feeling the water ripple against your skin as the murmur of the bathhouse fades into a quieter rhythm. The laughter has dwindled, and you're left with the faint slosh of water and the crackle of fire from the furnace. It's in this lull that you begin to notice something peculiar, a subtle, almost invisible force that shaped medieval bathing culture far more than soap or steam ever did. The church. You sit a little straighter. It's hard not to chuckle at the irony. Here you are, surrounded by naked humanity, while somewhere beyond the bathhouse walls, monks are writing stern letters about morality, sin, and the dangers of temptation through bathing. You can almost hear their quills scratching on parchment. A mainstream historical fact. By the later Middle Ages, the church had grown suspicious of public baths. What began as a neutral or even pious act, washing away dirt, both literal and symbolic, gradually became tangled in moral anxiety. Religious leaders feared that shared nudity, sensual comfort, and relaxed boundaries invited sin. Some sermons went so far as to claim that warm water softened the soul's vigilance, making bathers susceptible to moral decay. You imagine the scene, a bishop denouncing bathhouses from the pulpit, warning that heat inflames the flesh, while half his congregation secretly plans to visit one that evening. Bathhouses were not dens of debauchery by default, but they certainly provided opportunities for behavior that strayed from the straight and narrow. And where opportunity thrived, the church saw danger. Yet, as always, the story isn't that simple. The church also ran bathhouses. Monasteries often had their own washing facilities, simple, modest, and meant for health or ritual purification. Pilgrims were sometimes invited to bathe before entering holy sites. Even priests were known to visit public baths under the pretense of maintaining hygiene.
The hypocrisy would be funny if it weren't so deeply human. You can almost hear a medieval friar whispering to you through time. Cleanliness is close to godliness, unless, of course, you enjoy it too much. A quirky tidbit here: some bathhouses, to appear respectable, displayed painted icons or small crucifixes in their main halls. It was a clever way of reassuring patrons and any passing clerics that nothing sinful was happening inside. Imagine soaking in a tub while a slightly water-stained image of St. Catherine stares down at you, a faint halo glowing in the candlelight. It must have made the wine taste just a little more penitential. But the church's influence went beyond scolding. It shaped how people thought about water itself. In sermons and theological writings, water was seen as both purifier and tempter, capable of washing away sin, but also of luring the flesh toward indulgence. It's a strange duality that runs deep in medieval thought. You, sitting here in the steam, can feel it even now, that uneasy balance between holiness and hedonism. You look around the bathhouse, noticing how the room seems both sacred and profane at once. The light glows like candlelight in a chapel, the air is warm and reverent, and the murmurs of bathers sound almost like a chant. And yet, under that veneer of holiness lies a raw physicality: bodies, warmth, desire, exhaustion. The bathhouse is a kind of accidental temple, dedicated not to saints, but to the human experience itself. Historians still argue whether the church's disapproval genuinely killed off the bathhouse culture, or if it simply pushed it underground. Some records suggest that by the 15th century, public baths had declined sharply in parts of Europe, while others indicate that they merely evolved, becoming more private, exclusive, or hidden behind coded language. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in between. You step out of the pool for a moment, letting droplets slide down your arms. An attendant hands you a towel, coarse but clean, and you notice the faint mark of a cross stitched into the corner. Perhaps decorative, perhaps symbolic, the idea of faith lingering even here, in a place of heat and laughter, feels oddly fitting. People have always tried to reconcile the body and the soul. The bathhouse just happened to make that struggle visible. There's another side to the church's story, though, one less about sin and more about disease. During outbreaks of plague or leprosy, authorities, often influenced by religious leaders, closed bathhouses entirely. The logic was understandable: shared water, shared air, shared risk. But it also revealed how deeply superstition mingled with fear. Some claimed that hot water opened the pores and made people more vulnerable to illness. Others argued that steam carried divine punishment. You can almost hear a weary bathkeeper muttering, "If the fleas don't kill us, the sermons will." Still, despite bans and moral panic, people continued to bathe. They just did it more quietly, more privately, and often with a touch of rebellion. The act of washing became a small defiance, a declaration that comfort, warmth, and community were worth the disapproval of the pulpit. You picture a group of townsfolk slipping into a bathhouse after dusk, hoods drawn, whispering as they pass under flickering lamps. The door closes behind them, and the sound of laughter rises. For a few hours, they exist in another world, a world where sin smells faintly of rosewater and thyme.
Quirky detail: in some regions, bathhouses disguised themselves as bakehouses or breweries when regulations tightened. After all, both required furnaces and water. Imagine the confusion of a passing priest sniffing the air. Was that yeast or temptation? It's an image that sums up the stubborn resilience of human comfort. The more you think about it, the more it makes sense. The church's disapproval only added to the allure. Prohibition always does. The warmth of the bathhouse became not just physical, but psychological, a rebellion wrapped in steam. People came here not only to cleanse, but to feel alive, to indulge in the forbidden pleasure of simple human contact. You settle back into the water,
thinking of how that tension shaped centuries of behavior. The bathhouse became a mirror for the medieval soul, devout and indulgent, fearful and curious, moral and messy. Perhaps that's why it fascinated chroniclers and moralists alike. It represented everything they couldn't fully control. You imagine a medieval sermon delivered to a sleepy congregation. Beware the warmth that soothes the body but cools the soul. It's dramatic, a little absurd, and exactly what you'd expect from a society that feared comfort as much as it craved it. And yet, in hindsight, the Church may have inadvertently preserved the ritual's mystery. By making bathing morally ambiguous, it transformed the bathhouse from a mundane necessity into a symbolic act, something charged with emotion, secrecy, and even spirituality. You can sense it here, in the glow of the lamps and the hush of steam, the ancient human desire to purify not just the skin, but something deeper. You let the head rest against the stone edge, eyes half closed. The steam swirls upward, tracing soft patterns in the dim air. Somewhere, faintly, you imagine the toll of a distant church bell, the sound of morality echoing through stone streets toward a building where people right now are soaking in blissful defiance. That's the essence of the medieval bathhouse, not filth or purity, not luxury or sin, but the eternal struggle to reconcile pleasure and virtue, comfort and caution, water and fire. And as you exhale, letting your breath merge with the mist, you realize something simple but profound. Even in a world ruled by faith and fear, people still sought warmth. They still found ways to sit together in the steam, laugh softly, and wash away the day's dust, not just from their bodies, but from their souls.
You already feel it before you step inside, a faint tension in the air, something unsaid that clings to the warmth like steam on your skin. It's not just about cleansing anymore, it's about what happens once the door shuts, once clothes are gone, and laughter rises too freely. Welcome to the slippery edge where medieval bathing and moral panic collide. You're standing inside what was supposed to be a public luxury, and yet it doubles as something the church can't quite name without blushing. Picture it, a low-lit room filled with the shimmer of oil lamps reflecting on damp stone. The scent of herbs still floats from earlier infusions, rosemary, lavender, perhaps mint. But underneath, there's another scent, human and close. Voices carry in murmurs and giggles, sometimes punctuated by splashes that have nothing to do with soap. The bathhouse was never just about hygiene. It was a place where people met, flirted, whispered, and sometimes crossed lines that polite society pretended didn't exist. You glance around and realize that many patrons are not here for cleanliness at all. In fact, historians note that by the 13th century, bathhouses across Europe had blurred into the same category as taverns or inns, perfectly acceptable by day, questionably respectable by night. Some even offered separate relaxation chambers, complete with wine service and soft bedding for those who wished to, let's say, extend their evening. You can almost hear a medieval innkeeper's sales pitch. A warm bath? A little wine? Perhaps companionship? It sounds innocent enough, except everyone in town knows what that really means. Records from Nuremberg, Paris, and London list bathhouses that quietly employed attendants who did more than scrub backs. They were part of a profession the authorities never fully stamped out, the bathing wenches who blurred the line between servant and lover. You ease into the water, feeling the heat wrap around you, and try to imagine the moral contradictions floating just beneath the surface. The same nobles who condemned sin from the pulpit often visited these places in disguise. Chroniclers wrote, sometimes with grudging amusement, that priests and knights shared the same steam. One bishop even decreed that bathhouses within his diocese must remain open for health, not for pleasure, which of course only drew more curious visitors. Here's the funny thing.
no one could quite agree what counted as immoral. Was it the nudity, the mixed company, the laughter after hours? In some cities, men and women bathed separately, with rigid schedules and guards at the door. In others, particularly in Germany and parts of France, mixed bathing was not only tolerated but celebrated. People genuinely believed that soaking together in hot water fostered community spirit. And, depending on your definition of spirit, they weren't entirely wrong. You reach for a rough linen towel nearby, still damp from another bather. The fabric scratches slightly, grounding you as you listen to a pair of voices, a man and a woman, trading jokes from opposite ends of the pool. There's something so ordinary, so human about the laughter. And that's what scandalized moralists the most, the ease with which boundaries dissolved in the warmth. At one point, the church's attempt to regulate it all turned almost comical. In the 14th century, several councils issued rules like, "No man shall bathe with women unless she be his lawful wife," which sounds straightforward until you realize no one carried marriage certificates to the bathhouse. In England even, certain bathhouses kept respectability lists of regulars to prove they were legitimate, a medieval form of PR damage control. Historians still argue whether most bathhouses truly doubled as brothels or if later moral panic exaggerated their reputation. What we know for certain is that the two industries often shared architecture and clientele. Bathhouses were conveniently located near taverns, food stalls, and city gates, the crossroads where weary travelers arrived with coins to spend and little to lose. The boundary between service and sin was as thin as the steam rising off the water. Let's not forget the women who worked here. Some were licensed attendants, trained to mix herbs and oils, keep temperature steady, and tend to wounds or aching muscles. Others worked under the same roof, but for very different reasons. They offered intimate company, a euphemism that appears in tax records as a perfectly billable service. In some cities, they paid official fees, wore designed scarves or tokens, and were technically protected by municipal law. A strange kind of institutional hypocrisy that let society condemn and profit at once. As you listen to the gentle murmur of water, you realize how fragile a woman's reputation could be in this environment. A single rumor, one accusation of bathing improperly, could ruin her life. And yet, for many, it was one of the few paths to economic independence. You might meet a clever attendant who could mix herbal balms as skillfully as she handled gossip. In a time when literacy was rare, she might know which nobleman's mistress had just arrived in town or which merchant owed money to whom. The bathhouse was not just a physical crossroads, it was an information network wrapped in steam. Now, imagine you're the city watch, patrolling narrow alleys at midnight, and you hear laughter from behind a bathhouse shutter. Do you barge in and risk interrupting a paying noble? Or do you look the other way and collect your unofficial peacekeeping fee? The answer was usually the latter. Corruption thrived wherever water met temptation.
A chronicler from Augsburg once described an infamous establishment called Zum Paradies, the paradise. He claimed that anyone who bathed there might leave cleaner in body but dirtier in soul. Yet the same record shows city officials visiting it during feast days. You can almost picture the hypocrisy. Moral outrage in daylight, indulgence by candlelight. Not all of this was driven by lust or scandal, though. Some people genuinely came to the bathhouse to experience touch and connection in a world that offered little comfort. Life was hard, cold, and lonely. The bath offered warmth, conversation, even a sense of belonging. It's easy to forget that in medieval Europe, public displays of affection were rare, and physical contact often meant violence, not kindness. Here, at least for a moment, people could drop their guard. As you tilt your head back, you notice a painted ceiling, crude cherubs worn by steam. Perhaps a faint attempt at divine approval. The irony is thick enough to float in the air. Someone once spent days painting this ceiling, knowing exactly what would happen below it. The symbolism wasn't lost on them. By the late 15th century, civic leaders began to close or regulate bathhouses in waves, using outbreaks of plague as justification. Contagion spreads through unchaste waters, one decree read, which is not entirely wrong but certainly convenient. Public health and moral purity merged into a single excuse. It allowed towns to shut down spaces that made them uncomfortable, too mixed, too human, too hard to control. Still, the allure never disappeared entirely. In secret, some continued to operate behind respectable facades. A laundry that steams too much, a bread oven that stayed open till dawn. There are even letters from priests in confession manuals gently reminding parishioners that bathing in itself is no sin, but beware the company you keep. You smile at that because, of course, company is the whole point. The medieval bathhouse wasn't just a place to scrub dirt from skin. It was where people negotiated class, gender, and pleasure under the guise of hygiene. And whether you approve or not, it reveals a society far more complex than the moral fables suggest. Steam rises again, curling like memory around your shoulders. The water cools, but you don't feel like leaving just yet. You can almost sense the ghosts of laughter echoing through the centuries, proof that even in the most rigid times, humanity finds a way to soften itself.
You wake to the faint sting of rosemary in your nose, the ghost of steam still curling in the air. The water's cooled overnight, but something richer lingers, scent. In the medieval world, scent wasn't just decoration, it was a defense, a disguise, and sometimes a desperate illusion. You lift a linen pouch tied with twine. Inside, a crumbled mix of mint, thyme, and rose petals. The attendants called it herb sachet, a fragrant armor against the realities of medieval hygiene. And you needed armor. You truly did. Because if you'd wandered through a medieval city without it, you'd carry home the smell of humanity's busiest century. Tanners' pits, horse dung, wood smoke, sour ale, and the slow reek of unwashed wool. The medieval nose was built for survival. It didn't recoil at the same things modern noses do. Still, even then, people knew the difference between life and filth. They just didn't have the plumbing to fix it. So they masked it. You reach for a small ceramic pot, once sealed with wax, now half open. Inside, a buttery paste gleams faintly, civet musk, goose fat, beeswax, maybe crushed herbs. This was perfume before perfume. Less Chanel, more cover the carcass. Applied to the wrists, temples, and sometimes clothing, it promised to make one tolerable in company. Wealthy women layered so many scents that medieval writers joke they could be smelled before seen. One satirist claimed the scent of a duchess entered the room 5 minutes before her person. Even in bathhouses, where hot water should have been cleansed, the battle of smells continued. People poured scented oils directly into the water, rose if you could afford it, pine resin or vinegar if you couldn't. Afterward, they rubbed skin with crushed herbs or citrus peel, though lemons were imported luxuries. The goal wasn't cleanliness, it was olfactory camouflage. The strangest part, medieval people believed smells could make you sick. They weren't entirely wrong. Stench often accompanied disease, but since bacteria hadn't yet entered the conversation, they thought odor was the sickness. A miasma, as they called it, floated invisibly, bringing plague or fever wherever it went. If bad smells are killed, then good ones might be saved. So you find yourself in a room that smells like an apothecary on market day. One man clutches a bunch of lavender like a holy relic. Another burns bay leaves in a corner. You can almost hear the logic. If rot brings death, then flowers must bring life. Historians still argue whether this obsession with pleasant aromas had measurable health benefits or simply psychological comfort. But either way, the world reeked a little less because of it. Still, there were extremes. The royal court of France, for example, adored perfume with a passion bordering on madness. They wore gloves soaked in ambergris, a whale secretion, and perfumed wigs to mask the smell of stale sweat trapped beneath powdered hair. In some cases, the effort backfired. Ambergris and civet are both animalic, musky, and just a few degrees away from rotting meat chic. The scent of wealth, you realize, was not always pleasant. It was just expensive. Then came the stranger ingredients: unicorn horn, which was actually narwhal tusk, burned feathers, even ground bone. Alchemists promised such powders could purify the air. And for those who really wanted to impress, there was a lotion called angelic water, distilled from violet petals, rosemary, and wine spirits. The catch? It stung like acid and often caused rashes. But if your skin peeled, at least you smelled divine. Let's not forget the ever-creative bathhouse attendants. Between scrubbing backs and pouring hot water, they doubled as perfumers. They'd mix fresh batches of scented oil daily, sometimes soaking rose petals in warm animal fat, letting it harden into a balm. These were the ancestors of modern solid perfumes. The trick was to make them fragrant enough to overpower the room's reality. Imagine 30 naked bodies, sweat, smoke, and damp linen, and someone trying to fix it with rosemary and goose grease. Heroic, really. And then came the deodorant stones, alum, crystals rubbed under the arms to block odor, a luxury imported from the East. They were prized in royal courts, but almost unknown among peasants. Common folk relied on smoke baths, standing over smoldering herbs and letting the fumes cleanse the skin. If you were lucky, you'd smell faintly of sage instead of yesterday's fish stew. Sometimes, scent became flirtation. In the semi-private chambers of elite bathhouses, perfumed cloths were draped over shoulders or dabbed along necks. You might even receive a gift, a pomander, a metal ball filled with fragrant paste, hung from a chain at the waist. It was jewelry, medicine, and an invitation, all in one. To catch its scent meant standing close, perhaps too close. There's one account from 15th century Venice describing a wealthy courtesan named Caterina who carried her pomander filled with musk and cloves. Men followed her down the street as bees to a hive, one writer said. The smell was her advertisement, her aura, her weapon. But the irony is that inside, Caterina's bathwater was reused 3 times that day. Cleanliness was a rumor. Fragrance was power. The poor, of course, had their own olfactory tricks. A peasant might chew parsley or aniseed before visiting church, or stuff dried mint in his boots to mask the smell of old leather. Housewives hung herbs from rafters, letting their scent carry through cramped kitchens. Even babies had sachets pinned to their clothes, warding off evil spirits with sweet basil and fennel. In the medieval imagination, smell wasn't just about hygiene, it was morality. To smell pleasant meant to be good. To stink was sin itself.
You lift another jar, a cloudy concoction of vinegar and rose petals. This was the Four Thieves vinegar, named after bandits who allegedly used it to survive plague-infested cities. Whether or not it worked, it smelled sharp enough to sting your eyes. People carried it in glass bottles, sniffing it to protect themselves from infection. It's strange, isn't it, how scent became both shield and superstition. And yet, even in all this obsession, the medieval world never conquered odor. You'd walk from a perfumed court to a fishmonger's stall and back into the stench of open drains. Bathhouses tried to stand apart from that chaos, but even their scents turned sour after a few hours. Oils went rancid, herbs wilted, water stagnated. Clean was temporary.
a mirage of lilies hovering over a swamp. As you rise from the cooling bath, you notice how your skin glistens with oil. It smells like rose and wood smoke, faintly sweet, but undeniably human. You dry off with linen that still holds a ghost of other bodies. In a way, the scent connects you to them, to centuries of people who, like you, tried to outwit decay. And somewhere in a quiet corner, an attendant fans the air with a bundle of herbs. She's not thinking of sin or science, only of comfort. A small kindness, really. Even in a world where filth was constant, people still craved beauty, even if it came bottled in goose fat. You smile at the thought. Maybe luxury wasn't about marble floors or gold basins. Maybe it was this, the illusion that you could smell like something other than yourself. For a few brief hours, you could inhale sweetness instead of survival. The candle burns low, and the air grows heavy again, but the scent lingers, stubborn as memory. You breathe it in and think, this was the perfume of the past, equal parts charm and deceit. And in its layers, you can almost trace the human story itself, our endless struggle to rise above the stink of living, one drop of rose oil at a time.
You're sitting now by the door of the bathhouse, watching a trickle of customers drift in, coins in hand, chatter in the air. The steam smells faintly of lavender today, rare, expensive, and you begin to understand that bathing, for all its talk of purity, was first and foremost a business. Every drop of hot water was a transaction. Every bucket, every towel, every bowl of herbs came with a price tag. The medieval bathhouse, you realize, was one of the earliest small-scale service industries. There was no such thing as free cleanliness. The people who owned these establishments weren't saints. They were entrepreneurs, hustling in linen aprons, juggling heat, herbs, and gossip to keep the water and the money flowing. You run your fingers over a wooden counter, darkened by years of damp coin marks. This was the pay desk, where you'd hand over your token, usually a pewter disc stamped with a symbol of the house, a lion, a cross, or maybe a smiling sun. If you were wealthy, you might rent a private tub for the evening. If not, you shared the communal pool, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, hoping no one splashed too hard. The cost depends on your city. In London or Paris, a basic bath might cost the same as a loaf of good bread or a pint of ale. Affordable for many, but not trivial. Add scented oils, towels, or an attendant, and the price climbed. In Nuremberg, there's a record of one Stubemeister, or bathmaster, who offered a complete service for 2 pfennigs extra, hot bath, scrub, and meal included. Economically speaking, that's the medieval equivalent of a spa package. Still, the margins were thin. Wood for heating costs a fortune. Water had to be hauled in by hand or, in rare towns, piped through crude aqueducts. Maintaining temperature meant burning through logs at an alarming rate, especially in winter. A single bathhouse could consume enough wood in a week to heat several homes. Owners passed that cost to customers, meaning only the comfortable classes bathed often, while the poor stuck to streams or basins at home. You picture the attendants hustling back and forth, hauling buckets, stoking fires, changing linens. Most worked long hours for modest pay, sometimes sleeping in the steamy attic above the main hall. A few earned extra coins in the gray zones of service, pouring wine, giving massages, or selling scented soaps on the side. You can't blame them. Survival always breeds creativity. In towns with competition, bathhouses developed marketing strategies that would make modern advertisers proud. Some promised Roman-style luxury, complete with mosaics and heated benches. Others leaned into their reputation for discretion. No questions, no judgments. There were even loyalty perks. Patrons who came weekly might get a free herbal sachet or half-price entry during holy days. You glance up and see a painted signboard above the door. The Golden Basin.
It's flaking with age, but still grand enough to suggest prosperity. The owner, you learn, is a man named Otto, a shrewd businessman who inherited the place from his uncle. Otto knows that the path to profit isn't cleanliness, it's comfort. He rents towels, sells wine by the jug, and charges extra for soap made with imported olive oil. People pay because they crave a taste of refinement, something they can't get at home. Economically, the bathhouse sits in a strange space, part public utility, part luxury enterprise. City councils liked to regulate them, but also collected taxes from them. A clean population was healthy. A taxed population was even better. There's a surviving decree from medieval Prague listing fees for bath, towel, and reheating of water. Imagine paying a surcharge just to make your bath warm again. Medieval economics had no mercy. And yet, for all the nickel and diming, these places thrived. Why? Because they filled a social vacuum. The bathhouse was where you went to hear news, cut business deals, or flirt across the pool's edge. A merchant might meet a rival there and strike an agreement between buckets of hot water. A young couple might share glances over the steam. For many, it was the only public indoor space not controlled by the church. The irony, of course, is that this blend of cleanliness and commerce created moral headaches for city leaders. Too many late-night visitors? Too much laughter? Raise the tax, they said. Too few customers? Drop it again. It was the same eternal dance between regulation and profit that still defines business centuries later. Historians still argue whether the bathhouse economy was truly sustainable or just a bubble of indulgence that burst after the plagues. What we do know is that by the late 15th century, many closed, not because people stopped wanting them, but because heating fuel ran short and public fear grew. Disease, rumor, and cost killed what comfort had built. But during its golden age, the bathhouse offered employment for hundreds. The Stubemeister owned the property, but the daily grind fell on others. Apprentices chopping wood, women laundering linens in icy rivers, boys carrying buckets from well to furnace. The rhythm was relentless. Fill, heat, drain, repeat. You imagine their hands, cracked, red, and perpetually damp. And then, of course, there were the vendors hovering outside the door. You can hear them calling, "Fresh soap, fine towels, apples after the bath." They turned the street into a market, turning human hygiene into a local economy. Some bathhouses even partnered with taverns, splitting profits. Wash first, then drink, the sign might say, though the order is often reversed.
Money flowed in curious ways. Nobles sometimes rented entire bathhouses for private feasts, complete with musicians and candles. Picture it. A pool filled with hot water, floating platters of roasted fowl, a lute playing softly as courtiers sipped spiced wine. It sounds decadent, and it was. A chronicler from Burgundy once called it the most wasteful use of heat in Christendom. But it also funneled money through countless hands, cooks, woodcutters, perfumers, maids. You look down at the coins scattered across the counter, some dull, some gleaming. Each one tells a story. This wasn't just about bathing. It was about the medieval dream of buying a brief escape. Even the poorest worker, saving for weeks, might treat themselves to a bath before a festival. It was indulgence wrapped in steam, a kind of hope that cleanliness could elevate them, if only for an evening. Economists today might call it the comfort economy, but here, in this room, it's simpler. The bathhouse thrives because people crave warmth, in every sense of the word. You pay not for soap, but for belonging. You pay for an hour where the cold world outside disappears. Still, the risks of running such a business were high. Fires from overheated furnaces were common. Floods ruined floors, and moral scandals could destroy a reputation overnight.
A single rumor of indecency could empty the tubs for months. To hedge against ruin, owners joined guilds or bribed local officials. Otto, for instance, gifts his aldermen free bath tokens every winter. Insurance, medieval style. Occasionally, royal inspectors showed up, demanding cleanliness standards that no one could meet. There's a record from Paris where officials fined a bathhouse for dirty water left unrefreshed, meaning the same pool had been used too many times without changing. The fine? 2 silver sous. The solution? They simply raised prices. As night falls, Otto counts his coins by candlelight. You watch as he separates them into neat stacks, steam drifting like ghosts around him. He looks tired but content. Tomorrow will bring more buckets, more wood, more customers chasing that elusive glow of luxury. You realize something then. The luxury of medieval baths wasn't just the marble or perfume. It was the business of selling dignity to a world that lived knee-deep in mud. To sit in hot water, even briefly, was to imagine yourself clean, renewed, almost noble. That illusion kept the whole system afloat. Some say the Roman baths were grander, others that the Turkish hammams more refined. But these medieval bathhouses, loud, smoky, half holy, half profane, were the heartbeat of 1,000 towns. They were microcosms of the medieval economy itself. Labor, indulgence, corruption, and faith, all sharing one hot tub. You smile at the absurd perfection of it. Somewhere between soap and sin, between business and comfort, humanity managed to invent an entire market for feeling better. Maybe that's what all luxury really is, a way of paying to forget the dirt for a little while. The candle guttering beside Otto finally dies, plunging the room into soft dark. Tomorrow the fire will start again, the buckets will fill again, and the bathhouse will open its doors like a warm mouth ready to swallow another day's worth of coin and confession.
You easily open the door to another bathhouse, and the smell hits first. Something halfway between wet dog, lavender, and old wood smoke. You're deep into the medieval world by now, a connoisseur of filth and fragrance alike. The baths have become a second home, though you probably wouldn't tell anyone that. Not because you're ashamed, but because gossip spreads faster than a rash in a hot tub. Here, inside a German Badestube, luxury has evolved into spectacle. You spot bright banners hanging from the ceiling, emblazoned with family crests, saints, and naked cupids whose modesty is protected only by the flickering candlelight. Wealthy citizens, merchants, guildmasters, even minor nobles sit in carved wooden tubs lined with linen sheets, eating sweetmeats and gossiping about trade deals and scandals. It's like a medieval version of a spa day brunch, only the spa water is shared, and the brunch might include eel stew or baked apples bobbing on the surface, soaking up the scent of rosemary and something less delightful. You slide in quietly, imagining yourself one of them, your skin gleaming in the candlelight. The water's warm, but not hot. Bath attendants lug cauldrons of boiling water from the hearth to top it up, but their timing is inconsistent. One moment it's tepid, the next scalding enough to make you yelp and pretend it was on purpose. This place, unlike the earlier simpler communal baths, runs on rules. A strict schedule divides men and women's hours, mostly, but rules bend easily when money's involved. Wealthy couples often rent a private room for dual soaking, as the clerk politely calls it. Some of these private baths even boast raised platforms where servants feed grapes and pour wine. You can practically hear the echoes of flirtation bouncing off the damp stone. Still, not everything about these luxury baths smells like romance.
Historians still argue whether these lavish bathhouses were more centers of hygiene or hedonism. The line between health and pleasure blurs when the same herbal oils used to treat melancholia are also sold as aphrodisiacs. A monk, writing in 1420, complained bitterly that the waters heal nothing but the soul's restraint, which in medieval monk speak was a polite way of saying everyone's getting a bit too friendly. But you're here for history, not scandal, right? You notice the attendants again. They're fastidious in their duties, brushing stray hairs off clients' backs with goose feathers, adjusting towels with practiced indifference. These attendants, often lower-class women, held a curious position in society, trusted with intimacy, yet treated as invisible. Some could earn a decent coin through tips or special arrangements, while others barely scraped by, relying on leftovers from the bathhouse kitchen. Their lives, steeped in steam and whispers, rarely made it into the official records, but the atmosphere they created did. And oh, that atmosphere! In the corner, an herbalist mixes fresh sachets of mint and sage. "Good for the lungs," she tells a coughing merchant, before muttering under her breath, "and for bad breath." She wasn't wrong. The medieval diet wasn't exactly mouthwash friendly. Garlic, salted fish, onions, and ale left their mark. A long soak in perfumed water couldn't hide it entirely, but perhaps the steam made everyone more forgiving. You lean back, letting your imagination drift beyond the bathhouse walls. Across Europe, these luxury baths are spreading like wildfire, from France's étuves to England's stews and the great birdhouse of the Low Countries. They become part of urban identity, places where trade, politics, and pleasure intersect. In cities like Bruges and Lübeck, it's said deals worth fortunes were sealed over the rim of a steaming tub. Yet as you sit there surrounded by this watery opulence, the darker truth begins to seep through. Beneath the laughter and chatter lies fear, the same old specter that haunts every medieval gathering: disease. You overhear two bathers whispering about a fever that's been spreading through the city. It starts with chills, then boils. His companion waves it off, insisting the heat of the bath will ward off any ill humors. But you, the modern observer that you are, know better. These shared baths, warm, humid, full of microscopic life, are perfect breeding grounds. Still, they don't stop coming. To them, the bath isn't just a luxury, it's a way to show they belong. To refuse the bathhouse would be to step outside society's rhythm. You can feel that tension in the air, luxury and danger, comfort and contamination, all swirling together in a single steamy breath. In the evenings, music filters in from the outer room. Lutes, recorders, and the occasional voice singing of lost love and found coins. You picture the scene from above, the flicker of 100 candles reflecting off damp skin, gold jewelry glinting, and steam rising like incense toward the rafters. There's something almost sacred in it, though no priest would dare to bless this place. Then, a commotion. Someone shouts about a stolen ring. Attendants rush, buckets slosh, and laughter turns sharp. The owner accuses a washerwoman, who swears she saw a rat scurry away with something shiny. Historians would later debate whether these stories were exaggerated moral lessons or literal truth. But you can imagine it. A rat, sleek and opportunistic, darting through puddles beneath benches, gleefully ignorant of social class. The luxury of the medieval bath, you realize, is a fragile thing, built on precarious hygiene, social performance, and denial of how dirty even clean water can be.
A friar enters now, carrying a flask of holy water, claiming to bless the pools against unseen spirits.
You watch him sprinkle droplets over already murky surfaces and can't help but smile. There's irony in that. A priest purifying what's already been boiled, filtered through human bodies and left to stew. But it's also human. Every age wants to believe its rituals can hold back decay. As the night deepens, the luxury begins to unravel. Candles burn low, and the air thickens with the scent of damp linen and fatigue. The music fades, replaced by the sound of dripping water. You stand too, dripping too, feeling both refreshed and slightly unclean. Outside, the streets are cold and dark. The warmth of the bath lingers on your skin, but you can't shake the feeling that you've absorbed more than heat. You've touched something intimate about medieval life, the way comfort was always tinged with risk, how beauty and filth danced together beneath a veneer of civility. You pass another bather on the way out, his face red from wine and heat. "A fine evening," he mumbles. You nod, because what else can you say? Tomorrow he'll be back in the same tub, chasing the same illusion of purity. And maybe so will you, because here in the medieval bathhouse, luxury doesn't wash away the dirt. It just teaches you to enjoy it.
You return to the bathhouse days later, or maybe it's weeks. Time feels slippery in this world of steam and shadow. The baths have changed again. The same tiled walls, the same carved benches, but something in the air feels different, quieter, a little anxious, as though everyone's listening to news that hasn't yet arrived. And indeed, the whispers follow you through the corridors like drifting steam. There's talk of illness again, not just the usual fevers or boils this time, but something much worse. They call it the Black Death. You've heard rumors before, a sickness that rides the wind, kills fast, and ignores prayers. The bathers here are certain it won't reach them. The heat cleanses all, says one merchant confidently, sinking up to his neck in the water. You glance at him and think, not quite. Still, the business of bathing continues, because what else is there to do? The city lives by habit, and bathing, luxurious, social, indulgent, is a habit at its finest. You move through the steam, tracing how, even as panic spreads, the wealthy cling to their rituals. They add more herbs to their tubs now, sage, thyme, rosemary. Against the pestilence, says the herbalist you recognize from last time, grinding leaves with a pestle. She leans in, whispering, but it's really just to mask the smell of fear. You can't help but smile at that. She's right. You settle into one of the smaller pools this time, shared with a quiet scholar and two merchants who seem to be arguing over wool prices even now, even as half the world burns. The scholar catches your eye and begins explaining, unprompted, how the Greeks once wrote of the healing powers of heat. Balance the humors, sweat out the bad air. His tone wavers between hope and denial. You can hear it, the sound of someone clinging to reason while the world outside makes no sense. The luxury of the bath has turned into a kind of defiance. When the streets outside fill with carts carrying bodies, the bathhouse fills with laughter instead. Thin, desperate laughter, the kind that sounds more like prayer than joy. You soak, listening to their talk. Someone jokes that they'll wash the plague right off their backs. Another murmurs that maybe sin, not dirt, brought it here. Historians still argue whether bathhouses truly spread the plague or were simply blamed afterward by frightened citizens. Some modern researchers suspect fleas and rats, others contaminated water or even airborne bacteria. But here, in the thick of it, truth feels less important than faith. And faith comes in many forms. A noblewoman enters, veiled despite the steam, flanked by attendants.
She refuses to sit in the public pool, instead demanding her own water be drawn in a private chamber. The attendants obey without question, hauling buckets and sprinkling petals. You watch her through the curtain, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "My husband is gone," she says softly, to no one in particular. "But I'll not mourn in filth." The attendants nod. There's something almost tragic in that, clinging to ritual cleanliness as the world collapses. Bathhouses in this age were paradoxical, symbols of health, yet often blamed for disease. Cities like Paris and London began closing them, citing moral dangers. The church preached that washing too often tempted sin, and that true purity lies in the soul, not the skin. You imagine how strange that must have sounded to people who had spent generations believing water itself was sacred. Outside, rumors twist like smoke. Some say the water's cursed, that the devil lives in the steam. Others insist the baths attract angels who cleanse away evil humors. Historians still debate whether religious suspicion or sheer fear led to the mass closures that followed. But either way, the age of luxury baths is beginning to rot from within. You can almost feel it as you sit there. The heat feels less comforting now, the steam thicker, the laughter forced. The attendants' smiles don't reach their eyes. The floorboards creak more loudly, as if the building itself is holding its breath. And then it happens. A shout from the far side of the room. Someone has collapsed. The scholar, the one who had been mumbling about Greek medicine, lies face down in the water. Attendants rush to pull him up, shouting for air, for towels, for holy water. But he's already still. The bathers scatter in panic, splashing water, knocking over buckets. Someone screams, "The plague!" The attendants freeze. You do too. It's a strange moment, quiet and violent at the same time. Steam swirls around his limp body, rising like incense. A friar bursts in, clutching a crucifix, muttering prayers too fast to understand. The smell of lavender oil mingles with fear. That's when it hits you, the irony of it all. This place, once a temple of luxury and pleasure, now feels like a tomb. The same hot water that soothes sore muscles is now a vector of suspicion. The same steam that once symbolized relaxation now hides death. You slip out quietly, your heart pounding. Outside, the night air feels sharp, almost cold. The streets are empty except for the occasional cart, its wheels squeaking against cobblestones. You follow the sound until you reach a fountain. The water there runs clear and fast. Safer, maybe, or maybe not. A woman fills her jug beside you, muttering a prayer with every dip. She looks up and asks you if you've been to the baths. You hesitate, then nod. "Don't go again," she whispers. "They're cursed."
Her warning lingers, but you know what she doesn't, that the luxury of the medieval bathhouse was always an illusion. Cleanliness, purity, status, they were masks people wore against the inevitable decay of the body. Now, stripped of those illusions, the baths are just rooms full of water and fear. Weeks later, when the city authorities finally close the bathhouse, they seal its doors with wax and crosses. Inside, the tubs still hold stagnant water, scented faintly with herbs and rot. The once proud sign, painted with a golden basin and the word solace, health, hangs crooked, its paint peeling. You imagine the attendants walking home for the last time, their hands still wrinkled from years in the water, their futures uncertain. The noblewoman, perhaps, retreats to her estate, bathing only in bowls of rose water. The merchants move on to taverns, where at least the ale kills some germs. But in the darkness of those shuttered rooms, the echoes remain. Laughter, splashes, 100 conversations about trade, love, sin, and soap. The ghosts of comfort still clinging to their tubs. As you wander away, you realize how fragile the idea of clean has always been.
Even now, centuries later, we chase the same dream, bottled in different scents, sold under fancier names. Luxury, hygiene, health, they're still masks for the same old fear, that the body always betrays us in the end. You glance back one last time. Through a crack in the door, a single candle flickers. Maybe it's the last attendant tidying up one final time. Or maybe it's just the memory of warmth refusing to die. You walk on, the chill creeping up your spine. Somewhere behind you, water drips in the dark.
The bathhouse doors stay closed for years, but you, the wandering spirit of curiosity that you are, can't help drifting back when the danger finally ebbs. The city is different now. The streets are emptier, quieter. The market stalls, once loud with gossip, now trade more in whispers and prayers. Even the air feels cautious. You stand before the old bathhouse, its sign washed pale by rain, the smell of mold and old ash clinging to its walls. You push the door open. It groans, protesting years of disuse. Inside, the silence hits like a physical thing. The great tubs are dry, cracked. Spiderwebs hang from rafters where steam once danced. A rusted chain dangles from the ceiling, swaying ever so slightly, as if some ghostly attendant still tugs it. You take a slow step forward, your shoes scraping grip that was once marble dust and soap flakes. This, you think, is what luxury looks like when memory drains away. Yet even ruin has stories to tell. You crouch by one of the tubs and run your fingers along the wood, softened by rot, but still faintly perfumed. Lavender, mint, maybe thyme. The scent lingers, faint but defiant, a ghost of a ghost. Historians still argue whether the closure of bathhouses across Europe was purely fear of disease or a moral turning point. After all, once the plague receded, water didn't suddenly become cleaner or dirtier. What changed was how people felt about it. To some, these places now represented temptation, indulgence, and decay, a sinful luxury. Church sermons began to speak of the dangers of naked leisure. A Dominican friar wrote that to cleanse the flesh too often is to soil the soul. You can imagine the tone, that righteous certainty only the freshly terrified can muster. The message spreads faster than plague ever could. Within a generation, Europe shifts from soap to salvation. You wander deeper inside, imagining the laughter that used to echo through these halls. Now even your own footsteps sound hesitant. Somewhere in the distance, water drips from a cracked pipe, slow, rhythmic, almost like the heartbeat of something sleeping. You pause beside a shelf of old tools, wooden ladles, chipped cups, a jar that once held rose oil. Someone left in a hurry, that much is clear. You picture the last attendant locking up, maybe whispering a final prayer before blowing out the lantern. You wonder if she thought she'd return in a week, or knew, somehow, that the door would never open again. Outside, the world is still trying to make sense of itself. Bathhouses are out. Modesty and linen cloths are in. People now dry wash with scented powders or rub themselves with cloth dipped in vinegar. The wealthy even hire servants to perfume them instead of bathing, because perfume doesn't carry plague, or so they say. You try to imagine this new ritual. Nobles dabbing their wrists with musk instead of water, monks scowling approvingly from the sidelines. Cleansing of the soul, they preach, while their robes hide stains of travel and time. It's almost funny in a tragic way. Humans never stopped caring about purity, they just changed its vocabulary. A soft sound interrupts your thoughts. Footsteps.
You turn, expecting emptiness, but a figure stands in the doorway. A young woman, wrapped in a gray cloak, carrying a bucket. Her face is pale, her eyes watchful. "You shouldn't be here," she says. You smile awkwardly. "I'm just looking." She hesitates, then shrugs. "They all say that." You watch as she sets down her bucket and begins scrubbing one of the old tubs. Her motions are practiced, rhythmic. "You still clean?" you ask. She glances up, half smiling. "The city wants to reopen this place. For the poor, not the rich this time. No wine, no music, just washing." That surprises you. A rebirth of sorts. Humble, practical, maybe even noble. "Does anyone still come?" she asks. "Not yet, but they will. Dirt doesn't wait for permission." You like her answer. As she works, you start to notice how the light creeps back into space. Sunbeams slide through the broken windows, catching dust motes like drifting petals. You imagine what this place might look like restored. Fresh tiles, new tubs, warm fire crackling in the hearth. Maybe not luxury, but comfort. Maybe not zen, but healing. Still, you can't help feeling the ghosts around you, the echoes of laughter, arguments, splashes. The bathhouse feels layered now, each century leaving its residue like soap scum on the surface of time. You can almost see the outlines of old patrons lounging in invisible pools, their voices mingling with the creak of the young woman's brush. She hums as she works, a tune you don't recognize, something folkish, maybe. It reminds you that history isn't all grand events and disasters. It's this too, small acts of care. Someone, somewhere, deciding that cleanliness still matters, even when the world says otherwise. You help her lift a bucket, feeling the weight of water tug at your arm. It's colder than you expect. "You're not afraid?" you ask. "Of water?" She grins. "Only when it runs out." That grin feels like a tiny rebellion against centuries of fear. Outside, you can hear distant church bells. Once they told warnings. Now maybe they ring for something gentler, renewal, or stubborn survival. The woman finishes scrubbing, wrings out her cloth, and looks around the empty hall. It's not much, but it'll be clean again. As she leaves, you remain standing in the middle of the room. The late afternoon light glows gold against the cracked tiles. You take a deep breath. The air smells of dust, wood, and faintly, hope.
You realize that luxury in the Middle Ages wasn't always about gold or silk. Sometimes it was just the chance to feel clean, to feel human, even for a few minutes before the world returned. And maybe that's what this new bathhouse will offer. A different kind of luxury. One born not of indulgence, but resilience. As dusk settles, you step outside once more. The streets are damp from a light rain, the puddles reflecting broken bits of sunset. You walk slowly, replaying the echoes of the bathhouse in your head. You think about how strange it is that something as simple as water can carry so much meaning. Sin, health, vanity, salvation. Historians still debate when exactly Europe gave up on bathing and when it rediscovered the joy of soap. But in your mind, you know it never truly disappeared. It just went underground, hidden in basins, whispered about by washerwomen, remembered in songs like the one that girl hummed. You turn a corner and catch a glimpse of another sign being painted on a new building. Public Bath, Charity of St. Roch. The painter hums the same melody. You smile. The baths are coming back, slowly,
carefully, quietly. The luxury may be gone, but the water remains.
You returned again, drawn not by curiosity this time, but by something gentler. Maybe hope. The bathhouse is open now. Not quite as grand as before, of course. Gone are the carved beams and the stained glass lanterns, gone the silken towels embroidered with family crests. What remains is simpler, humbler, and somehow more alive. When you step inside, you hear water running again, an unfamiliar sound after all that silence. The air smells faintly of smoke and soap root. Wooden tubs have been repaired, patched with iron bands and lined with straw mats. Instead of servants in livery, a handful of apprentices move about with buckets and brushes. They nod politely when you enter, though none of them stop to gossip. They're too busy keeping the fire steady, the water warm. It feels different this time. No laughter, no feasting, no clinking cups of wine or whispered propositions behind curtains. Instead, there's the low murmur of families washing, children giggling, the occasional splash as someone accidentally tips a ladle of water too hard. You sit quietly, watching. A woman scrubs her little boy's hair with rough soap. He wriggles, squealing, and she shushes him with a smile. An old man soaks his feet nearby, eyes closed, humming a song under his breath. This is no longer a house of luxury. It's a house of necessity, and in that necessity, a kind of quiet grace. You slip off your shoes and wade into the smallest pool. The water is lukewarm, edged with the faint tang of ash and herbs. You catch yourself sighing, half in comfort, half in memory. You remember the steam of the grand bathhouses, the perfume of rose oil, the laughter echoing in marble halls. This place has none of that sheen, yet somehow it feels cleaner. The woman from before, the one who scrubbed the floors alone, spots you and waves. Her name, you learn, is Greta. She's the caretaker now, proud of her new title. "We keep it open 3 days a week," she tells you, her sleeves rolled up, arms slick with soap. "For anyone who needs it. The bishop blessed the place himself." You arch an eyebrow. "Really? After all that talk about sin and nakedness?" She grins. "Turns out even the holy people need a little washing now and then." It's true. Times are shifting again. Historians still argue about exactly when Europe began to rediscover its affection for bathing, but you can see it here in miniature. Cities are growing, trade is reviving, and a clean body is once again a sign not of vanity, but of discipline, even virtue. Kings build private baths in their castles, while townsfolk construct simple public ones like this. Soap making, once a fringe craft, is becoming a legitimate profession. Greta gestures to a small shelf lined with bars of pale, lumpy soap. "Made it ourselves," she says proudly. "Animal fat and lye. Not fancy, but it works." She offers you a piece, and you rub it between your palms. It smells faintly of smoke and rain. You wash quietly, listening to the sounds around you. A young boy is telling another how knights used to bathe before battles for luck. An old woman corrects him, not for luck, for health. They argue, and you smile. Even in this plain place, myth and medicine still mingle. As the water ripples around you, you start to realize how much these humble baths mirror the resilience of the people themselves. The medieval world has changed, scarred by plague, reshaped by faith, but it refuses to surrender comfort entirely. The people have simply adjusted their expectations, redefining luxury as survival, and survival as grace. You remember the grand tubs of the old days where nobles soaked in rose water, while peasants toiled in filth. Those baths were monuments to vanity. This one is a testament to endurance. Greta walks past again, carrying a steaming bucket. "It's strange," she says. "When we first opened, folks were nervous, thought the water might still be cursed. But now they line up before dawn." She lowers her voice.
Some say it even helps the sick. You nod. Does it? Maybe. Maybe not. But it helps them feel human again. That's something. Her words hang in the air, heavy with truth. The scholar in you, the one who remembers centuries of debate, recalls how doctors prescribed sweat baths for melancholy, vinegar rubs for plague, even urine rinses for toothaches. They didn't always work, of course, but the impulse behind them, the need to cleanse, to purify, never vanished. It's deeply human, that longing to wash away the chaos of the world, to emerge somehow new. You soak until the water cools, and then you climb out, toweling off with coarse linen. Around you, the small acts continue. Hands washing hands, buckets refilling, children laughing. There's no grand music, no poetry, yet the rhythm feels sacred. Outside, the evening bells ring again. Greta begins to drain the tubs, humming the same tune you'd heard months ago. You linger by the door, reluctant to leave. She notices. You'll come back, won't you? You nod. As long as there's water. Then there'll always be reason enough, she says. You step into the street, the cool air brushing your damp skin. The world smells of smoke and bread. For the first time in what feels like forever, you notice how clear the stars are tonight. It occurs to you that the medieval obsession with water, holy or unholy, luxurious or filthy, wasn't really about the body. It was about hope, about believing that transformation was possible, even in the darkest times. You walk past other small bathhouses, new ones rising from ruin. Some are run by nuns offering charity to the poor, others by merchants who see profit in the public's renewed appetite for cleanliness. The contrast makes you smile. Even now the medieval world finds a way to make morality and money coexist in the same bucket.
One house catches your attention. Its door is open, and inside a priest blesses a newborn with a few drops of water. Baptism, the holiest bath of all. You pause, realizing that even when the church turned away from the bathhouse, it never stopped believing in the sacred tower of washing. That, you think, is the strange symmetry of it all. Filth and faith, sin and soap, forever entwined. You keep walking until the sound of splashing fades behind you. In the quiet, your thoughts turn to the people who made all this possible. The attendants, the washerwomen, the nameless hands that boiled the water, mixed the herbs, and carried the heat. They were never celebrated, yet without them, no one, noble or peasant, would have known luxury or relief. History forgets their names, but their work lingers in every drop of warmth that touches weary skin. The wind picks up, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and thyme. You realize the night no longer feels heavy. Something about this small, unremarkable bathhouse has shifted the mood of the whole city. Maybe, you think, comfort doesn't have to be extravagant. Maybe it just has to exist. You turn one last time before heading home. Through the window, you see Greta lighting candles, her reflection shimmering in the rippling water. The scene is quiet, almost sacred, a portrait of ordinary grace. And just like that, you understand, the medieval world didn't lose its luxury, it simply learned to live without pretending it was pure. You find yourself at the bathhouse yet again, drawn by the rhythm of water and the faint memory of steam rising through stone. The place feels familiar now, but with each visit, layers of history press against you. The walls seem to hum with memory, laughter, whispers, splashes, and the faint scent of herbs left behind by centuries of caretakers. It is no longer about luxury or indulgence. It is about continuity. The baths have survived plague, moral panic, and neglect. They exist now as a testament to human persistence and adaptation. You slip inside quietly,
letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. Candles flicker along the walls, casting long shadows that dance across the worn wood and patched tiles. The smell of soap and damp straw fills your nostrils, comforting yet pungent. It's a blend of the medieval past and the present moment, simultaneously harsh and tender. You dip your hand into the water, feeling its warmth ripple across your skin. It is neither lavish nor perfumed, yet it is sustaining, enough to remind you that water carries life in every droplet. The bathhouse is alive with activity, but it is different now. Children laugh, their voices ringing above the gentle clatter of buckets and brushes. Adults move with a quiet deliberation, washing away days, months, maybe even decades of dirt and tension. The simplicity of it strikes you. No ornate carvings, no perfumed oils, no lutes or serenades. Just the human need for cleansing, for comfort, for small, tangible renewal. This is what it means to endure, to find solace in acts as ordinary as washing one's hands or soaking one's feet. Greta, the caretaker, moves among the bathers, her presence steady and calm. She has become both guide and guardian of this space, a silent witness to the cycles of humanity. You watch her pour warm water over a child's shoulders, the little one squealing in delight. There is a rhythm here, a gentle choreography. Water, soap, cloth, warmth. Each movement repeats the one before it, and in that repetition lies reassurance. You realize that the baths now serve a different luxury than before, the luxury of routine, the luxury of reliability, the luxury of simple pleasure uninterrupted by the trappings of wealth or status. Historians still debate whether medieval baths were more about hygiene, social performance, or indulgence. From your vantage point, you understand that they were all of these things and more. They were laboratories of human experience, places where social hierarchies, cultural rituals, and intimate gestures intersected in unpredictable ways. And even now, centuries later, those lessons resonate. The modern visitor might think of spa luxury or medical hygiene, but at its core, the medieval bathhouse was about human connection, the quiet acknowledgement of shared vulnerability, the unspoken understanding that everyone enters a pool with both dignity and imperfection. You sit in one of the tubs for a long time, letting the warm water cradle your body. You watch families interact, apprentices work, and old patrons smile at one another from across the pools. There is no pomp here, no attempts at grandeur, only the honesty of water, the continuity of ritual, and the presence of people navigating their own frailty. The room itself seems to exhale, releasing centuries of accumulated tension, gossip, pleasure, and fear. You imagine all the lives that have passed through these doors, the noblemen, the washerwomen, the priests, the sick, the healthy, the joyous, the mourning, and feel the pulse of their stories in the water that surrounds you. Somewhere near the back, an elderly man washes with deliberate care, his hands trembling slightly as he scrubs its skin worn by years of labor. He hums a melody you do not recognize, but it feels ancient, like a song carried through generations. You reflect on the continuity this bathhouse embodies. Each drop of water that touches him is a bridge to the past, a reminder that human needs, desires, and rituals remain surprisingly constant. Pain, pleasure, relief,
and renewal all flow through the same channels, regardless of century or circumstance. The children climb out of the pool, squealing, and run to dry themselves on rough towels. You notice their laughter is more than joy. It is the manifestation of resilience. They have inherited a world shaped by fear, disease, and moral scrutiny. Yet they move through it with abandon, reminding you that the human spirit always finds a way to navigate constraints. Even as the bathhouse stands as a witness to centuries of struggle, it also offers hope that life, in all its messy, imperfect glory, continues. Greta approaches you again, this time carrying a bowl of warm water to rinse your feet. She sets it carefully at the edge of your tub, her hands steady, her eyes calm. It's strange, isn't it, how the simplest acts can feel like miracles, she murmurs. You nod, feeling the truth of her words. There is magic in ritual, in repetition, in the act of tending to oneself and others. You think about the luxurious indulgences of the medieval elite, the rose water, the lutes, the scented oils, and realize that while opulence fades, the power of simple care endures. Around you, the bathhouse continues its quiet hum, water trickling into tubs, brushes swishing against skin, laughter rising and falling like a gentle tide. It is almost sacred in its ordinariness. You understand now that medieval baths were never just about washing. They were about participation in life itself. Every splash, every scrub, every careful pour of water carries centuries of human experience, a tangible link to ancestors who sought the same comfort, the same relief, the same fleeting peace.
As dusk begins to fall outside, the candles flicker, casting long shadows across the room. The water reflects the light, shimmering like a pool of liquid memory. You linger for a while longer, allowing yourself to be enveloped in the continuity of human ritual. The bathhouse, once a symbol of luxury and indulgence, now represents resilience, adaptability, and the enduring need for care. It is a quiet monument to the human capacity to endure, to find pleasure in simplicity, and to discover grace in acts that seem ordinary yet profoundly sustaining. Eventually, you climb out of the tub, toweling off slowly. You pause by the door, taking one last look at the scene. Families drying themselves, apprentices tidying up, Greta moving among them with quiet authority. The bathhouse is alive, a living archive of centuries of human experience. It has endured floods, plagues, closures, and neglect, yet it stands renewed, a reminder that the most profound luxuries are often those that meet the most basic human needs. You step outside into the night, the cool air brushing against your damp skin. The stars overhead are bright and clear, mirrored faintly in puddles along the street. You realize that what you have witnessed here is not merely the story of water, baths, or hygiene. It is the story of humanity itself, flawed, resilient, creative, and capable of finding renewal even in the simplest acts. You take a deep breath, the smell of smoke and damp stone lingering, and begin walking home, feeling the weight and warmth of history settle comfortably on your shoulders. The bathhouse fades behind you, but its presence endures, a quiet reminder of the cycles of indulgence, neglect, fear, and care that define life across centuries. You know that long after you leave, water will continue to flow here, carrying with it stories, memory, and the enduring pulse of human experience.
You walk slowly through the streets, the chill of night brushing against your damp skin, and let the events of the bathhouse settle gently in your mind. The lamps along the cobbled streets flicker, their warm light pooling like honey on the stones, and you realize that the city itself seems to sigh around you, exhaling centuries of steam, laughter, whispers, and memory. Each puddle reflects the muted glow of lamps and the distant shimmer of stars, and for a moment, it feels as if you are walking through the very memory of the medieval world itself. The bathhouse you just left, now quiet and unassuming, holds the echo of 1,000 stories, the mundane, the humorous, the anxious, the tender, and you carry those echoes with you. Even as you move further from the doors, the lessons of the baths linger. There is comfort in simple acts, you realize, the warmth of water, the sensation of cleansing, the routine of care. For centuries, people sought luxury in ways that felt indulgent and elaborate, but the essence of that luxury was never really about opulence. It was about renewal, about asserting some small control over a body and a life that is, by nature, fragile and impermanent. The medieval baths, in all their grandeur, in all their decay, were less about wealth than about the human need to feel alive and tended to. And in that, they resonate even now across centuries and across every place where someone dares to pause and wash, to breathe, to refresh. You remember the young children laughing in the shallow pools, shrieking as water sloshed over the edges, the elderly man humming softly as he washed his hands and feet, Greta moving with quiet authority, tending the baths without ceremony or fanfare. Every one of them was a participant in a ritual that is older than cities themselves. There is a kind of magic in that, a subtle reminder that human life is measured not only in grand events, in wealth or conquest, but also in the quiet continuity of everyday care. The echo of centuries of bathers hums beneath your skin now, a gentle pulse that reminds you that the body, the mind, and the spirit are intimately linked. You find a bench under a flickering lamp and sit, letting your thoughts drift like the mist that once filled the bathhouse. The warmth of the water, the tactile sensation of being cleaned, the soothing rhythm of movement and repetition, all of it leaves an imprint that lingers even after you step away. In that moment, you feel the strange intimacy of history, that you are connected to those long-dead bathers, that the fear, joy, indulgence, and care they experienced is, in some way, your own. Every bath, every simple act of washing was a tiny declaration that life mattered, that even amidst disease, poverty, and the strictures of morality, there was still room for comfort, pleasure, and dignity. You think about the fragility of luxury, how quickly it can vanish when cities close, when epidemics sweep through, when cultural values shift. Yet even in its absence, the need for care, for warmth, for the tactile reassurance of clean water persists. It does not vanish. It finds its way back, reshaped, repurposed, renewed. The modern bathhouses, the simple public pools, even the act of washing your own hands carefully and intentionally, they are all part of the same thread. Across centuries, people have sought the same small miracles, even when the world around them seems harsh and unforgiving. The night grows quieter now. The flickering lamps along the street seem steadier, more deliberate, and you take a deep, measured breath. You realize that what you have witnessed is more than a story about medieval baths. It is a story about resilience, about human ingenuity and adaptation, about the enduring capacity to find solace in ordinary acts. It is a story about warmth, water, and the quiet courage of generations who dared to care for themselves and others, even when comfort seemed impossible. You rise from the bench and begin to walk home, the cool night air brushing against your damp hair and skin. Each step feels measured, deliberate, calm. The streets are empty but for the occasional echo of your own footsteps. Somewhere in the distance, the murmur of a night watch or a distant animal reminds you that life continues, quietly, insistently. You carry the echo of the bathhouse with you, a reminder that beauty and care are not dependent on gold, grandeur, or perfection. They are available wherever someone chooses to reach for warmth, to touch water, to create a moment of comfort in a world that is often unkind. As you approach the threshold of your own home, you pause, letting your mind linger on the night. The stars overhead are steady and clear, reflecting in your mind the faint glimmers of candlelight from centuries past. You understand now that the medieval bathhouse is more than a building, more than tubs and wood and water. It is a symbol, a memory, a touchstone. It is the enduring reminder that human life, in all its imperfection, can still be touched by care, by ritual, by gentle attentiveness.
You step inside, leaving the cool night behind, and feel the quiet calm settle over you. The echoes of water and steam remain, soft and comforting, a lullaby from the past. You realize that, like the bathhouse itself, you carry within you the continuity of human experience, the desire to refresh, to cleanse, to care, to find moments of grace. And as you sit, quiet and still, you feel the lingering warmth of water and history flow through you, a gentle whisper reminding you that comfort and care, no matter how ordinary, are never lost.
End of script. Sweet dreams.